All right, I think it's time for a sim on internal control communication. And this is going to be for the audit of a non-issuer. One thing for sure, auditor judgment plays a big role in what's a control deficiency versus a significant deficiency, what's a material weakness. Remember, in an audit of a non-issuer, the auditor is not even reporting on internal control or even searching for internal control weaknesses, simply considering internal control. Why? Because it's important to the nature, extent, and timing of further audit procedures. So that's the primary purpose of internal control to a financial statement audit of a non-issuer, is to determine the net, the nature, extent, and timing of further audit procedures. So let's review these deficiencies in internal control that are reported to governance, to management. We have to know the difference between a material weakness, a significant deficiency, and a control deficiency. If you remember, a material weakness is a deficiency or a combination of deficiencies in internal control that results in a reasonable possibility that a material misstatement of the financial statements will not be prevented or detected and corrected on a timely basis. A material weakness is the most severe of the three types of deficiencies, because it's the material weakness that, in the auditor's professional judgment, results in a reasonable possibility that a material misstatement of the financial statements will not be prevented or detected and corrected on a timely basis. So we're not just saying there's a possibility of a misstatement in the financial statements. With a material weakness, we're saying there's a reasonable possibility that a material misstatement of the financial statements. So obviously that's a severe case. Material weaknesses must be communicated to management and to those charged with governance in writing within 60 days of the audit report release date. Now, better to do it by the release date, but you get the extra 60 days. Okay, so that's the material weakness. What about a significant deficiency? A significant deficiency is, in the auditor's judgment, less serious than a material weakness, but more serious than a control deficiency, and a significant deficiency must be communicated to management and those charged with governance in writing within 60 days of the audit report release date. Now, in the audit of a non-issuer, the auditor doesn't search for either of these, material weaknesses or significant deficiencies, but if you find any, that's when you got to communicate them. To who? To management and those charged with governance. How? In writing. When? By the audit report release date or 60 days after. All right, what's a control deficiency then? Control deficiencies are those that may not allow management or other employees in the normal course of performing their functions to prevent or detect and correct misstatements on a timely basis. What's the difference here? Well, it all starts with the auditor identifying a control deficiency and then, based on professional judgment, determining whether it rises to the level of a significant deficiency or maybe all the way up as high as a material weakness. So if it's just a control deficiency but it doesn't rise to the level, what's the auditor's responsibility to communicate it? Well, it says control deficiencies that are not significant deficiencies or material weaknesses should be communicated to management orally or in writing if they merit management's attention. So we're not going to bother governance with these control deficiencies that don't rise to the level of significant or material weakness, but we might mention it to management orally or in writing if we think it merits management's attention, and that's all based on auditor's professional judgment. So we did a quick review of the types of control deficiencies, and I want to take a look at the material weakness again for a minute. A material weakness is a deficiency or a combination of deficiencies, we said, that results in what? A reasonable possibility of what? That a material misstatement of the financial statements will not be prevented or detected and corrected, right, on a timely basis. It's this term reasonable possibility that I want to go over. So if there's a material weakness, then in the auditor's judgment, that results in a reasonable possibility, and reasonable possibility refers to the probability being more than a remote chance that the weakness will lead to a material misstatement of financial statements. So the term reasonable possibility here refers to the probability being what? more than a remote chance that this weakness, this material weakness, will lead to what? A material misstatement of financial statements. So now that we reviewed the basics here, let's answer some questions on internal control communication in the audit of a non-issuer. Now we're going to do this in a true and false format. There's going to be 20 questions, and each one I want you to tell me true or false. You ready? A significant deficiency is a deficiency or a combination of deficiencies in internal control that are more severe than a material weakness. True or false? And of course that's false. A significant deficiency is a deficiency or a combination of deficiencies in internal control that are less severe, not more severe, less severe than a material weakness, but merit attention by those charged with governance. Remember where significant deficiency is, that's the middle level. It's less severe than a material weakness, but more serious than a control deficiency, and that's why the auditor's judgment, the decision was made to communicate this in writing within 60 days of the audit report release date. So that's why question 1 is false, because the question states more severe. It states that a significant deficiency is more severe than a material weakness. No. Number 2, only those control deficiencies considered to be significant deficiencies or material weaknesses are required to be communicated in writing to management and those charged with governance. True or false? And that is true. Only those control deficiencies considered significant enough, either significant deficiencies or even more material weaknesses, they would be required to be communicated in writing to who? Management and those charged with governance. They're not the same people, are they? Management tends to be your officers, and those charged with governance tend to be your audit committee or your board of directors if there's no audit committee. What do we say about those control deficiencies that are not significant deficiencies or material weaknesses? They should be communicated to management, orally or in writing, if they merit management's attention, and they wouldn't be communicated to governance at all. Because those control deficiencies are just not important enough in the auditor's professional judgment to bother governance with. Number 3, significant deficiencies and material weaknesses should be communicated by the auditor to management and those charged with governance in writing within 60 days after the audit report release date. And that is true because this is an audit of a non-issuer. We said the auditor should communicate significant deficiencies and material weaknesses to management and those charged with governance in writing within 60 days after the audit report release date. Now, the information could be communicated orally during the audit if the need for corrective action is urgent. But assume nothing's that urgent that's found, then within 60 days of the audit report release date. So the first 3 were pretty basic. Now it's going to get a little tougher. Number 4, a significant deficiency previously communicated during the prior year's audit that remains uncorrected causes a scope limitation. True or false? And that's false. A significant deficiency previously communicated to management and governance that remains uncorrected, let's say in this year's audit, does not cause a scope limitation, which would be an inability for the auditor to obtain sufficient appropriate audit evidence. It would be a problem for management, but it wouldn't necessarily impact the auditor's ability to gather evidence. All right, number 5, an auditor's communication on significant deficiencies in internal control should include a restriction on the use. True or false? And that's true. Remember, this is for a non-issuer. This whole sim is for a non-issuer. So an auditor's communication on significant deficiencies in internal control should include a restriction on the use, stating in the communication that the intended use is, quote, solely for those charged with governance, management, or specified regulatory agencies, and is not intended to be used and should not be used by anyone other than the specified parties. Who are these specified regulatory agencies, you ask? Well, sometimes companies are receiving federal funds, they're getting grants, and then they have to have this internal control communication reported to whoever is that's giving the grant. Sometimes that's the federal government. So this is all about non-issuers, right? What if this was an issuer? Well, then the auditor would be required to report on whether the client maintained effective internal control over financial reporting. And in that case, the report would not be restricted. So if this were an issuer, the report on internal control would not be restricted. But here, we're talking about a communication to management and the audit committee, governance, and this communication for the non-issuer would be restricted. Number 6, the auditor need not communicate significant deficiencies and material weaknesses to management and those charged with governance if management is already aware of them. True or false? Leave me the answer in the comments section just after you like and subscribe, because it really helps the channel out a lot. And then, if you want to see the rest of this sim and many others like it, go to CPA Exam-tutoring.com and get yourself on I-75, the right road to passing audit.